Good morning, good evening. If you're joining us from across the globe, let's just be a little bit inclusive, not sure where people are joining us from. And thank you for joining us. The word Ubuntu became popular worldwide during apartheid as Bishop Desmond Tutu explained a philosophy in multiple South African ethnic groups that our humanity derives from the humanity of the collective. Ubuntu symbolizes the universal bond we have as a people and the focus on collective responsibility. Just as the pandemic has illustrated how interdependent we are, this collective is focused on working together to move forward in our shared commitment to improving inclusion and diversity in the legal profession. We believe that we rise and fall together. Built on this concept, the Belonging Project is a collaborative network of professional and personal support for diverse legal talent across industry organizations and law firms. Through the Belonging Project, we are offering opportunities and programs to support diverse law students and lawyers during the pandemic. This initiative will contribute to diversity in the legal profession and encourage others to contribute and leverage their expertise and resources. In collaboration with our industry partners, we will offer webinars focused on professional and personal development, one-on-one coaching, and a curated resource center devoted to well-being and professional growth. I am here today with my friend and colleague, Sozi, to discuss the importance of inclusive leadership and its effects on successful mentoring, as well as strategies for an effective mentor-protege relationship. I am Satra Sampson-Arokium, the Global Director of Diversity and Inclusion at Deckard LLP. As the late Congressman Lewis said, never ever be afraid to make some noise and get in good trouble, necessary trouble. Today, I am pleased to make some noise with my friend and colleague, Sozi Pedro Tulante. As a partner at Deckard, Sozi focuses on white-collar criminal defense. He's also an adjunct professor at the Law at the University of Pennsylvania School of Law. He was the city solicitor of Philadelphia from 2016 to 2018. Prior to his appointment as city solicitor, Sozi spent 5 years as assistant U.S. attorney at the U.S. Attorney's Office in Philadelphia, where he conducted criminal investigations and prosecutions of narcotics and white-collar offenses. One could say throughout his career, Sozi has never been afraid to get in trouble. So welcome, Sozi.
Thank you for having me.
As we begin, we're going to get into some trouble, Sozi, but we have all taken different paths and some linear, some winding. You know, I look at it as an abnormal EKG, you know, to get where we are today. You can't fully really appreciate the value of someone's advice without having context about the person's background. So can you just please share your story with us, share your path to where you are today?
Yeah, and before I do, I want to thank the Belonging Project and thank you for getting me in some of this trouble. But I had to correct you. You got to look for good trouble. When I was growing up, I had a hard time determining what's good and bad. But I think at this point in my career, to echo Congressman Lewis, it's all about the good trouble. So my story is I'm a refugee from the Congo. The Congo is this huge country in the middle of Africa. When I was a kid, people asked me, "Where's the Congo?" I say, there was a rumble in the jungle with Ali Foreman. Yeah, I'm from the jungle, and people kind of got that. I don't know why. And I came to the U.S. in Philly when I was 8 years old. I was a refugee. My dad was a political prisoner, and I thought that America at the time was a land of milk and honey. We used to watch shows that many of you are too young to remember, like Knots Landing and Dallas when we were in Africa, and I hated JR. He was in Dallas. And so we came to the US, we thought, we had this image that everybody was born with money, right? You sort of came out and just had just a lot of cash. And then when we landed in Philly. So that ended very quickly. We landed in North Philadelphia at the height of the crack cocaine epidemic. And that's where I grew up. My dad was he was a general in Africa. Then he drove a cab for about 30 years. My mother eventually got a job working in the House of Detention here in prison in Philadelphia. And it really was, we learned our way. We made our way. We were on welfare, and we didn't know any lawyers. That was the big thing. The only lawyers we knew were the brothers who were in the back of the Yellow Pages. Again, some of you too young, you don't know what Yellow Pages are, but there are all this big book that had everybody's numbers on it. The White Pages that had people's personal numbers. I didn't get it. So they would have all these lawyers, like if you're in an accident or whatever, and those were the only lawyers we knew and the only brothers we knew, because they had these like long, pinstripe suits. They had little gaiters on. And so that's what I thought lawyers did. I had no concept of what it meant to be a lawyer. So let's fast track. A few years later, my bad trouble turns into good trouble, and it's in the context of school. I go to college to do the law school thing, and then I go into the world, and I'm a young associate at a major law firm, and I have no sense of what lawyers develop. From like many of you, my success to that point was you give me an assignment, I study it, I evaluate it, and then I spit it back out. But I had no concept of, the other things that go into being a lawyer, the relationships, the mentoring, what business development meant, what the role clients played in. Pitches, I just thought you just got work. You just showed up and there was work there. I had no sense of how it came in. And so, it was something that I knew I wanted a little bit more. So I pivoted to work to clerk for a judge. And that's where I met my first real mentor, the judge I clerked for, the late Honorable Reginald Lindsay. He was the only African-American judge in the District of Massachusetts, and became a really close mentor. And he taught me the term, you can always tell a Morehouse man, but you can't tell him much. And, I always repeat that when I see any brother from Morehouse. So, the key takeaway, and something you're going to hear me emphasize and reaffirm over and over, is that very few lawyers, you can be diverse or not, tall, short, whoever you are, you're not going to be able to succeed without a network of mentors and sponsors, people who invest in you, who look out for you, who care for you. And that doesn't happen organically. People don't call you up like, hey, Sozi, what you doing? Are you looking for a mentor? Yeah, great. I could be your mentor. It doesn't work that way. You really need to do the investment and a lot of the work on your own as a protege or a mentee. And so that's something that, we'll spend a lot of time talking about today. And, and a few tidbits that we'll discuss is, try to develop mentors who are as diverse as possible. They don't have to have the same gender, race, sexual orientation, backgrounds. They can support the Cowboys, which to me, that was like the biggest. I'm like, he's a Cowboys fan, but he's looking out. And, so I had to give that up. But, you got to reach out to prospective mentors, send emails, do a lot of virtual drinks or lunch, make sure. But the key thing also is in the times we live in, people are really, really happy to hear from other people who are expressing an interest in their career, who want to talk to them. And so, that's something that I found. Like I check in on somebody, and I would say 80% of the time they'd always say, "I'm so glad you called." Right? Normal times you don't say that. They literally say, I really needed that call. And so most of the opportunities I received in my career have been because of my mentors and sponsors. And and I have a mentor now. I have a few mentors now. I won't reveal who they are because I'm 44 and they don't they don't want to be seen as mentoring a 44-year-old guy. But I suspect that over the period of your careers, as you develop your careers, you're going to start developing the same network of mentors and sponsors.
Thank you, Sozi. You're aging us here, right? So you have the young ones, the young law students probably watching, and some younger folks, and they're like, "Oh, why are these old people like telling us about mentoring?" So, but let's dig in a little. You put the onus on the mentee, right? So we know that mentees have to seek people out, and again, it's not organic, right? But given what we know, we know that there are introverts amongst us. There's a renewed focus because of the Black Lives Matter movement. Should mentors, and as we're talking about inclusive leadership, should mentors take the lead in seeking out mentees or even proteges? And isn't that part of what an inclusive leader is?
Yes, I think that's the part and parcel of the definition of being an inclusive leader. By being inclusive means you're hearing from, different people. You're empowering a lot of different people. So, one of the things that I do as a prospective mentor is there are two ways I get mentees. And again, we'll be using this word mentee and protege, and we'll unpack, why we do that. But I often get them by referral. Right, somebody called me and said, "Hey, there's this person in law school, or there's a person who is, thinking about a legal career or working in the city. Can you talk to them?" And I get those from trusted sources, right? People who are friends of mine. And the key thing, that the reason I call it sort of trusted, is because before I meet that person, they already have some validation, and the person who's referring has a sense of what my values are and what that person's values are, so that there's actually a good match. Sometimes, other times, particularly as a professor, I identify prospective mentees through just a course of talking to BOSA students, going to events, being able to address some issue. I do a lot of talks right now and thinking about police reform, and you start a lot of conversations that way, and people want you to talk to them because ultimately, the legal industry in particular, we can, when we talk about the post-Floyd era, I feel people are so focused on the police and policing, and I think it's an opportunity to step back and look at it with a wider lens and really look internally in the legal industry, and all the different ways that folks are not being able to be successful. And part of it is that mentors can provide that guidance. An example I always give is like the way we give work, right? The way many law firms give work is that there's no formalized working system. So you give work to the people you're most comfortable with, people who are closest to you, people who you see, people who you go to the same clubs as you, whose parents are cool with you. And then many times they look like you. They often don't look like me, but they look like that person. And if you're someone who doesn't have a mentor, like that happened to me, I was just like, okay, well, I guess I'm gonna get work because I get work. And it really wasn't until after I met my Judge Lindsay, who explained like how the systems work in a law firm, how you need to seek work out, how you need to be able to, understand how people are promoted. But that's something I would never have been able to be prepared for. So that when I went to my next law firm, I was prepared to understand what I needed to do and be very intentional, so that I can go to the U.S. Attorney's Office, which is my ultimate goal, to try cases. But I think the Black Lives Matter movement, after your firm and your company done their statement, Black Lives Matter, everybody's hugging. After all that, then you got to pivot to the real work. And I think that one thing me and a couple other people have been able to do is working with law students, with mentees, to help them navigate through this, because there's a lot of anxiety too around the pandemic and other issues that are going on. It's pretty trying.
You gave us a lot, Sozi. So I'm trying to unpack a couple things here. One of the things you said, was really trying to seek out mentees for BALSA and so forth. Can you share? I mean, when we were talking before and just getting ourselves together for this presentation, you talked about having a conversation with a young student who had no clue why they were going to law school or why they were there, or about even getting a mentor or getting guidance. Can you just share with us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I find, and many of what I'm about to say is probably familiar to a lot of us, is for you to get into a law school and to succeed, first of all, I think that's successful. All that stuff you got to go through, the LSAT and all. But for you to sit there, for many of us, we say, we made it. There's a lot of pressure for many diverse law students. They're either the first to go to college, or if they're not the first, they're first to go to law school. They don't have uncles who are lawyers. Some do, and I'm not making, sort of like broad generalization, but many don't. And what I find, even in being around law students and being in law school setting, is that there really isn't a structure. Some are developing it, and I'm on a board of an organization, a Penn, that's working on that. A structure to sort of focus on students who you can help them with these other intangibles that go beyond the career services saying there's an opening here, apply. This is the deadline, these are the materials. So I was talking to a student, and this is similar to many conversations I had, where they were telling me about a law firm and it didn't make any sense. And I didn't want to voice it because I like staying in my lane. I want to hear people out instead of having them get a sense of what I want to hear and then tailoring their message to me. And it became obvious that this student, who'd come from Mississippi, was the first to go to college, first to go to law school, was under a lot of financial pressure and literally took the first job that he was offered. And even though the list of other possible employment I thought would have been better fits because of what he wanted to do substantively, where he wanted to go, firms that had multiple offices because he wasn't clear where he wanted to be situated. But then once I unpacked it, it was clear like he was under a lot of financial pressure, and he didn't realize the leverage he had as a law student, as one who had done I thought was successful. And because he was concerned about his grades and so forth, he's like, I'm just gonna go there. It might not be a good fit, and and that really upset me because it was clear that. And I asked him like, who do you talk to about this? And it was clear it was just a career people, but there was no trusted person who can say, hey, here's the way you need to think about it. And I can tell you that there are a lot of people who do that. They take the job that gives them the most money, or at least appears to be best, without having somebody help them with that fit. And I have to follow up with him to see how he's doing. But I saw that more, and I'm a big fan of clerking, for instance, because I understand the value a clerkship has on your resume, but also having a judge who's a sponsor, a mentor, an ally, make calls for you, being able to validate you, particularly for young Black lawyers, is very powerful. But also, if you start clerking, that's a substantial pay cut from what you'd be getting at a firm. And I make the economic case. I say if you count the firm bonus, if you go up to a firm and having done the clerkship and the trajectory it puts you in, you actually are going to end up ahead. But it's hard to be able to make those long-term decisions because you see what's in front of you. This is going to be 70,000. This will be 150,000. You take the 150 and you keep it moving.
No, very insightful, Sozi. And I think you're doing a lot. I know what you do in giving back and so forth. So let's just unpack a little bit more about inclusive leadership. How do you define inclusive leadership? And before you answer that, I want to just tell our audience who's watching and listening, please feel free to also type in your questions in the Q&A chat, and we will actually infuse them into our conversation today. So please don't hesitate to send us questions about mentoring, about questions that may be on your mind. So yeah, Sozi, can you just define inclusive leadership and maybe share a little bit about the competencies we talked about, adaptability, developing diverse talent, and so forth. Can you just talk a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, the way I see inclusive leadership is, it's one of those tests that asks you, what's inclusive leadership? You say it's leadership that's inclusive. But I think it's a little bit more, it's a little deeper than that. I think the way I'd seen it, certainly when I was in a position, to be able to hire and to retain, was putting people in a position to succeed. So the way I talk about diversity and inclusion is diversity is getting people to the table. Inclusion is actually listening to them, so listening to their thoughts. And one of the reasons that in the legal world and quite frankly most professional circles, there's a problem of retention. You can get people in the door, but keeping them is that you get the diversity. Look at our numbers. Look what we have. Inclusion is like well, how many of those people are you bringing to pitches? How many of them are presenting? How many of them are getting trial experience? And so inclusion for me is putting people in those positions. And so when I was at the law department, I was there for 2 years, but we hired 78 attorneys, and and I think we hired more attorneys over a 2-year period than any other private or public institution, whether the DA's office, any law firm, and over 51% of them were diverse. And where everybody got mad, how'd you get all these Black attorneys? How you get all these Latino attorneys? I was like, because I go to the BALSA meetings and I go to all the Hispanic Bar Association meetings, and I tell them, you come to the law department, you're going to be trying cases. You come to the law department, you're going to be in transactions where involving some of our biggest parks and land holdings. So I think inclusive, adaptability for me is in some ways easier for people like us, because to be Black and to be successful, you have to be adaptable. We call it code switching. You got to be able to flow with the people you grew up with. I grew up in North Philly, and talk to them like that, and then switch and be like, how are you doing? What you saying like that? No, I wasn't saying that. Don't worry about that. But you got to be able to do that. And so everywhere I've worked, I've always did that. I've always done that with the staff. So whenever I go in, there's either a cleaning woman or somebody, who works the front desk. And, you go up and you dap them. You're like, what's up, man? I'm cool. And then you see somebody else like, how are you doing? I'll get that memo to you, Jim. And then they see like, how'd you do that? I said, because at the end of the day, you have to be authentic, right? You have to be yourself, because that doesn't work if you're not authentic. And I think that, diverse lawyers are the most adaptable lawyers in our field. And one of the things I'm trying to push really is that you see that when we get in front of juries. Jury don't care about, you went to Yale. They don't care about, they never read your law review note, didn't understand, what fancy professor you research for. They want to know, can they look you in the eye and listen to you and, feel that you're yourself. Don't fake it. And I remember that when I had my first trial at the U.S. Attorney's Office, I tried out my wife. I did my opening, and I said, "What'd you think?" She said, "It doesn't sound like you. It sounds fake." I said, "I know it sounds fake, but you know me, so you know it's fake. They don't know me, so I can be fake with them." And she's like, "No, they'll always tell." And I was like, "Nah." And then later on, I realized, yeah, of course they can tell. They observe everything you do. And so that's one way, adaptability is really important. Is that you have to be authentic. But we've always been able to fit into different pods if you're a Black lawyer and a diverse attorney. And I guarantee most people listening to this have been accused of sounding white, or not being Black enough, or sometimes being too Black, sounding Black, and those are like sometimes inconsistent messages. But we get that because you got to be able to flow in different settings.
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy you said that, because I mean, even in your peer group sometimes, and even your family, you hear, "Oh, you're too white. You sound too white," or you're not, yourself. So it's we all have, I think, have dealt with that.
That's crazy.
Yeah, it does. And as we're talking about adaptability, a question came in: to be Black and successful, you have to be adaptable. Yes, boom, yes. Can you give 3 of your top tips? I mean, you gave one already. Can you give 3 of your top tips on being adaptable?
Being adaptable, one of them is I don't know if it's a tip, but the best way for me to frame it is I've seen it when it's failed, and it's been when you think you know what people want, so you change yourself to try to meet that criterion. And oftentimes it fails because, you can be adaptable, and being adaptable is important, but you got to do it in a way that's true to yourself. Right. And so whenever, and most of my experiences come from thinking about trials and juries. And I remember going to see one of my colleagues, she's a good friend of mine still. There's a Black woman, and she's in front of a jury. And the jury's kind of like this watching her. She's just like telling stories and, doing this and doing that. And I went back to my boss, my supervisor, is another mentor. And I said, I can't do that. I mean, she had the jury kind of like, essentially it was like church. She would say something like, mm-hmm. She would say something, objection, all that kind of stuff. I said, I can't do that, right? And then I remember I can't adapt like that. I could try, but again, I won't be authentic. And I remember my supervisor said, you got to do you. You got to do what makes people feel like they're getting you. And one thing when I left the law department, I remember saying, it's going to be in some ways easy for me to leave because I'm the same person I was when I came in. I got, I had to fight to get my Westlaw password. They're like, you can't get a Westlaw password. You're not supposed to do research. I'm like, that's how I think. I got to look at my hyperlinks and I got to be able to do my site checking myself. And, and that's something that I retain to this day. But also adaptability requires, and it goes back to the original point that we started with, is having a crew of mentors and sponsors who are different, because how you present yourself to one mentor is different than how you present yourself to another mentor. And it's important for you to be able to, be in front of, be conversant with some issues with one mentor and converse with another. And what I find a big repeated mistake mentees make is they all want to be mini-me's. So they see you and they're like, I want to be just like you in whatever, and I don't know what they have in mind of what that means. But they want to have the same career, have the same goals, be the same place, and I always step back. I said, well, who's advising you? Like you got to have people who are very different, who have a range of experiences. My mentors some of them are not lawyers, some are in academia, some are in business. Very few are actually in law firms. Some are on the bench, some are prosecutors. But I'm able to ask them things that, in some ways are not legal, they're not illegal, but they're not about legal issues, right? Because I would say, how do I approach this issue? Or I have a meeting, I have this client pitch, and here's who's going to be there. Like, can you tell me about, what should I be thinking about? And it's not about like, you should talk about the 11th Circuit decision. It's not substantive. Is like, they're going to be interested in this issue, probably. They're going to be interested in this and that. And that really, really helps me.
So, Sozi, interestingly, you talked about, mentors give different advice, right? And they use mentors differently. So, let's talk about, creating a board of directors, right? And let's remember our audience are both, attorneys and individuals who are not attorneys, may work in law firms, may work in industry and so forth. Let's talk about it a little. I mean, the millennials will probably call it a different name, their pod, their crew, whatever they want to call it, right? But mentors come in all shapes and sizes. Can we talk about the importance of building that crew, that board of directors, individuals that may not even believe that they're your mentor, but you feel that they're mentoring you, right? So It doesn't have to be always formal. So can we talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, in fact, I'm glad you mentioned that, because I've now reached the point where I just tell people, you're on my board. They're like, well, is it compensated? Like, what are SEC filings? Like lawyers, we make corny jokes like that. But, I just tell it because the way I structure sort of this board, and then I'll talk about how you can do it differently for yourself, is I have somebody who advises me in long-term goals. Like, moonshots, things that may never happen, but they force me to think beyond the day to day. Because if you use your mentor just to say, I have a memo, what do I do? I'm going to court, what's happening? Of a job that's not, you can have a mentor that does that, but you also need somebody who knows you, who values you, who understands what you're interested in, what your skill set is, who can say, have you ever thought about X, Y, and Z? I'm like, well, no, I never thought about that. It's like, okay, they'll just say that. I'm like, wait, what are you talking about? What do you mean? I have a mentor who I call like a firefighter. It's somebody I call just like when things are going crazy. I'm about to have a difficult conversation, and they can get me to calm down. And that's a mentor I called whenever if I was in court and I felt like I was being treated differently because I'm Black, and anyone who's been in that position knows that one of the worst parts about racism and the parts that many people don't understand is that it makes you feel like you're going crazy, because you take an incident and you replay in your head and you're like, did he just say that? I mean, did he? What does that mean? Did he mean that? And then some of your white colleagues like, oh no, that's just him. He's like that to everybody. He didn't mean anything. I was like, I don't know. And I have somebody who are just like, here's what happened. Am I going crazy? And sometimes they're like, yeah, you're going crazy. You need to let that go. And so other times they're like, yeah, you got to figure that out because it's going to drive you crazy. I have that person. I have a person who's not a lawyer at all, who really kind of helps me as a community member, as somebody who cares beyond just like doing my legal work and teaching, but how can I help mentor people who are not lawyers, people who are younger? What can I do in the community? What board should I join? Who I need to talk to. And that's also really gratifying, because if all you have is work, if all you have are your memos and your deal documents, I mean, you're probably going to be okay in terms of, professionally, but, it's going to be hard long term to to have a life and to have friends and to have an identity that's not tied to your work. And I think the people I find most successful, they work their butts off. I've seen what they do, but they have something else. They have something else that keeps them going. Sadly for me, I'm a big Sixers fan. And so end up just like yelling at the screen when somebody gets injured. But it's something I enjoy and I do. So, but I think in terms of it's important to be intentional about creating a board, and the one more than just some professional affiliation, look for a value match. Make sure that person's values match your values. And an example I'll give is that if you're somebody who mansplains, who yells, who plays games, I just don't need you to be in my life right now. And because if you're mentee or protege of mine, that's on my word. That's my reputation. And one thing that's happening, Satra, you won't be surprised, is that there are a lot of people who tell people that you're their mentor, and you have no idea who they are. They sneak in at LinkedIn. They're like they're friends on LinkedIn. You said yes. You know how that happened. But now, like, that's my mentor. I gotta see what is going on. I don't know who this person is. So I'm very particular in that, right? Because if you're a mentee, you're somebody I'm investing a lot of my time and resources to.
Well, that's part of being an informal mentor, right?
Exactly.
A word or two. It's all of that. And while we were speaking, a question came in, about talking about really creating a culture of inclusive mentoring and sponsorship. So the question says, what are a few of the best practices for creating a culture of inclusive mentoring and sponsorship, or can you list some good resources? And Sozi, I'll have you talk first, but one of the top things for me is making sure that your company or your organization or your law firm has a robust mentoring program. You need to understand how are people being mentored, because I know in certain places it's ad hoc. Prior to me joining the legal industry, and so we talked about that, how I obtained some of my board of directors, some of my mentors, was just by being bold, right? And having those bold conversations. And I told Sozi the story about, being at Deloitte when they introduced a firm-wide robust mentoring program. And I selected the chief HR officer as my mentor. And he sent me an email to say, well, you are in such and such a role. Why should I be your mentor? I have everyone else in HR who wants me to be their mentor. And I simply responded. I said, I aspire to have your job one day. And the next thing I knew, the email said, come up and see me. And the rest is history, right? So it's sometimes about making bold moves. So, Sozi, any best practices that you might want to share or advice you want to share about how can organizations or even law firms create a culture of inclusive mentoring and sponsorship?
I think the most important thing, and we just to give you some context, at the law department, we didn't have a diversity committee when I started in January 2016. We didn't have any mentoring program or anything set up. And so we put in a diversity committee. They just won an award last week from the International Municipal Lawyers Association as the best diversity committee in the country. But I think one thing that happened was you learn from failure. So here's how a lot of mentoring programs work. So you have someone who says, John, hey, how's it going? We got somebody coming in next week. You're his mentor. I'm trying to finish this. Yeah, good luck. Have fun. His name, her name is Jane, and she went to Chicago or she went to wherever. And so John's like, well, I really, I'm not really trying to do this, right? But I got assigned. So, Jane comes in and there's a meeting, slightly awkward meeting, like lunch. I'll take you out to lunch. They have lunch, and it's done. And John's like, I've mentored. I took the person out. I'm good. And Jane's like, well, I don't want to ask any questions because he seems really busy, but I don't really have anyone to answer. So you pull back, right? And then the firm's like, yes, we have a wonderful mentoring program. John is mentoring Jane, and then Jim is mentoring. I always use John, Jane, and Jim because I never have like Sozi and Satra. And we could use it in the future. That would show how we've changed. But what happens? So they brag about that, but the mentee doesn't feel like anything's happened, and the mentor kind of feels like, well, I did what I needed to do, and I don't get credit for it. So in the law department, what we did is we stepped back and we started thinking about value matching. So let's think about who's coming in, and where are they from? Get a sense of like what do they like to do? See if we can match it, but also not just have people volunteer, because what ends up happening, and studies have shown that whenever you have committee work and all that stuff, a lot of women have the burden of all that. They volunteer for that. And so when they're being evaluated, they don't get credit for that. And so what we said is like, well, we're going to make people do it, but also show that it's because it's, and also evaluate people on it. So we would say, who have you mentored? What's been that like? What have you done? And I felt that worked a lot more because then it created, you had a better match, and the match was more longstanding. And then we also put a time period to it, so that people don't have to feel like they're doing this for. And what we found is that after the time period, people still retain those relationships, right? Like you don't have to talk to Satra anymore. I'm like, oh no, Satra's cool. That she's also, AKA like me, like, oh my God, how'd you guys know? And then AKA's me, they go crazy, and they're like really connected. And I think that that's something that it took some time to sort of put in place. I don't know, I'm assuming that some semblance of that is still going on, but I think that's one way of having effective mentoring. And I would say the reason that the Jane and John story rings true for me, because my worst mentoring experiences have been, I started a new institution. I'm assigned a random person, who just happens to be next on the wheel to be my mentor. We have some like awkward lunch and we talk a couple times, and they go their way and I go my way, and I don't really talk to them. And, and whatever institution's like, we have a mentoring program, Sozi's in it, and I'm not going to say anything otherwise. I'm just going to, keep it moving.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great example. And, a question did come in about, how do you handle situations when your company assigns you a mentor, but it's not a good match? And, we talked about that, in preparing for this in terms of, did you ever have a mentor who was not a good fit, and how did you handle it, right? So I want to ask you that question. But before we go to that, Sozi, just to jump on a resource for the individual who asked a question about some good resources, the New York City Bar actually put out a best practice brochure in terms of a mentoring program. And I know Deborah Owens is listening, so I'm plugging you, Deborah. New York City Bar has some great resources, the Office of Diversity and Inclusion. So please go there and get some resources from them. So Sozi, bad mentoring, how do you handle those situations in a company when they assign you a mentor, but it's just not the great match? How do you get divorced?
It's like many divorces, you just ignore each other and you don't talk, and eventually it sort of works its way out. And that's what I've done. And one thing I forgot to add is that you have to do mentor training. I have to believe, and I feel very confident saying this, that lawyers are the worst mentors they could possibly be, because we tend to be too analytical into this, and we don't invest in sort of to be a good mentor. You have to ultimately care. That's by far the most important thing, that makes one a good mentor. So if you don't explain to somebody what it takes to be a mentor, what things to do, it ends up being a pretty bad match. And so what I found is, where I've had bad mentors, or now I would say a bad mentor, I just feel like it just, we're a mismatched mentors. I just went to somebody who I could kick it with, and I started asking that person questions. I started, using that person as an ally, as a resource. In my example, it actually motivated me to seek out mentors on my own, because I realized if I do nothing, I'm going to be in this like mismatched mentor relationship. I'm not going to get the answers I want, particularly when you start at a new place. A lot of your questions feel like stupid questions, but you just have no one to ask it to. And so it's kind of motivated me to do that. And I would say I can't think of an instance where the mentor I was assigned ended up being mentor in any meaningful way. I was like, and at a firm, and I remember a firm I went in where I realized like I wasn't gonna have any mentors in the firm. I went outside and, was able, and that actually motivated me to be active in the Black Lawyers Association here in Philadelphia, the Barristers Association, because I felt like I found at home, and it gave me the confidence that I needed to go back to my firm and do what I needed to do.
Thank you for saying that, because I really want people to also understand, and everyone to understand, that it's not just seeking mentors in your firm, seek elsewhere, right? And use resources outside, externally. Look at organizations, right? Go into those organizations and be a part of them and seek mentors there as well. But Sozi, something very important you said. You said not everyone knows how to be a mentor, right? Let's touch on that for just a moment, and let's talk about how we can, engage our allies as well, right, in becoming good mentors to people of color, or just good mentors in general, right? What are some strategies for an effective mentor-mentee, mentor-protege relationship?
And it's funny because as I was thinking about this question, I was thinking, what can I do to make mentees be better mentees? But I think one of the things that I've been focused on recently, and particularly, I always call this in the post-George Floyd moment we're in. And I'm always hoping that moment is a long moment, but, I worry that moment is like a shrinking moment and the days are passing by, is trying to help allies become effective allies, particularly for our younger attorneys, because I feel as though people want to help. Some people want to help. Some people don't care. They're like, I don't know what just happened, but I'm just gonna keep moving. But the people who care, many of them don't know how to help, how to be allies, and so and what, in my experience, what happens is that then they try a little bit. They don't know what to do. They don't want to ask uncomfortable questions, have uncomfortable conversation, and they step back. So that's actually one of the things I've been, and the firm, as well as like how to get people to reach out and understand that people are in pain. Like, people are finding it very difficult. And the pandemic has isolated us where we don't even have the meaningful interaction. So, but that's a separate issue. But I think in terms of an effective mentoring looks like, to quote Maya Angelou, she said, in order to be a mentor and an effective one must care. You must care. You don't have to know how many square miles are in Idaho, which I don't. You don't need to know what is the chemical makeup of chemistry or blood or water. Know what you know and care about the person, care about what you know, and care about the person you're sharing with. And I feel that for many mentees, they're too strategic. They say, I do IP litigation. I need to find a mentor that does IP litigation. And so, and in doing that, they're needlessly narrowing the realm of potential mentor. And I would say a mentor is simply somebody who cares about you and your career. And if they care about you and your career and they value you and they share the same values, you have a mentor. And effective mentoring means being engaging. So, being very active about engaging with each other, agreeing to disagree. If I tell a mentee something, and they're like, well, I'm just not going to do that. I'm like, all right, we're done. You're wasting my time. I'm going to go find somebody who does everything I say. My kids don't do that. So I really got to find somebody. But the example I give, you started out with John Lewis. When I was in college, my focus was on the civil rights movement. And if anybody knows about John Lewis and Dr. King, Dr. King invited John Lewis to Montgomery when he was going to college in Tennessee. And, and he said, you must be the boy, John Lewis. He's like, I'm John Robert Lewis. And, so you must be the boy from Troy. He called him. But over time, they disagreed on a lot of stuff. John Lewis was with SNCC, and they're students, they're like causing havoc. Dr. King was with the ministers, SCLC. But despite the disagreement, and I know John Lewis has spoken about this, he saw Dr. King as a mentor. He saw him as someone, even though they disagreed on tactics and strategies, they valued each other and they cared for each other. And as a result, you know, they had this really unmistakable bond that I think John Lewis took with him when he passed, but also bequeathed that to us. So I would say, you know, ultimately, and the way you get somebody to care, you know, Satra is a magic word. To have somebody care for you, one of the most effective things to do is care for them, show an interest in them. And some of the most effective, my judge would always say, like, he had a mentee that I didn't like. You know, I was like, you know, Judge, why are you mentoring? It wasn't like I was jealous. I'm good. You know, I have good self-esteem. But I was like, why are you spending your time with this person? And he said, you know what? This person, you know, before she applied to clerk, wrote to me, had clips about stuff I've done, knew I went to Morehouse, like, you know, would send me all this Morehouse stuff, went to the Morehouse Glee Club, like, concert. And he said, this person really was invested in me. And so had put in the time. And so I'm not suggesting you stalk a prospective mentor, but you really need to do the work. So it's not just simply you pick up the phone, like, mentor me. You got and to give an example, last week, somebody just wrote, like, hey, Mr. Tulante, nice to meet you. Here's what I'm doing. I know you've done this. I've watched this webinar that you did. I'm interested in this issue, because they know what they're seeking is my time. And as you know, my time is valuable. I have 3 young kids. I'm working a lot. So if I'm gonna carve out time, I want to know that you've done the work before you've come to me.
That is fantastic, Sozi. I mean, I love to hear that. I mean, and you have so many stories we can go on. This webinar can go on for another whole hour or so. But I wanted to ask you, you know, about those relationships, right? Those mentoring relationships and mentors turning into sponsors. And unbeknownst to mentees and proteges, they are being groomed at times. Can you just talk a little bit about that? Because I know I was groomed to become where I am today. So can we talk about your path and talk a little bit about that, unbeknownst to you?
Yeah, so I mean, I'll give an example of how I was groomed and then was able to sort of pay back. When I was clerking, unbeknownst to me, my judge was sort of trying to prepare me to go to the U.S. Attorney's Office. I had no interest in being a prosecutor. I did the whole clerkship thing because I felt like I needed just to take a break and reassess where I was going. And, you know, what he would do is, like, if there was some U.S. attorney arguing something and they were doing a poor job, like, Sozi, come to the courtroom. And I go in there, I'm like, yo, this guy is struggling. He's like, yeah, he don't know what he's doing. He's with the government. They got the FBI, DA, whatever. So he keep doing that. And later on, I'm like, I don't know what I'm gonna do. I might go back to my firm, go to the. He's like, you should be a prosecutor. I said, what am I gonna be a prosecutor for? He said, you know, look at that guy you saw who was struggling. Look at this and look at that. And he said, think about what it means for your career. Think about what it means to do public service. Think about, again, unbeknownst to me at the time, you know, I know we have a Black president. I was like, I work at DOJ at that point. But he really was able to sort of mentally prepare me to do something that was beneficial to me in a way that I didn't even appreciate. So what I think about effective mentors is that they see things in you that you can't possibly see in yourself. And I don't have professional, you know, I don't have lawyer parents. I don't have somebody who can say, well, if you go to DOJ, you'll be the U.S. Attorney's Office, you'll be in this unit, you can do this. I didn't have it. My dad's like, you going to be a prosecutor? I was like, yeah, Dad. I was like, I think the judge somehow, like, brainwashed me into thinking, like, this is the best thing for me. And I think he's right. And then I did the same thing for a lot of people in the law department. So what would happen is, because I was really focused on diversity, I was strategic about, when I bring someone in, that if they're hired, I never hired a single person, to be very clear. I made sure my managers hired them so they knew what my values were, because I didn't want somebody coming in and be like, oh, he just got hired because he's Black, because the solicitor is Black. So, and because I knew if I left, I wanted them to maintain their strength. But I was very intentional about talking to them about what their careers will look like and putting them in positions where they can succeed. I'll put them in cases where, you know, they're in front of a Black judge who's a friend of mine, who then can give them feedback and say, here's what you do, you know, in a way that others won't be able to, so that they can be better. And so over time, I would actually say, when they're able to leave the law department, I would be their best reference because I knew their work. I was able to have them talk to the mayor. I was able to put them on, the biggest cases but because I knew they were ready, and I knew they were ready before they were ready. So I was saying, I think I've probably been the reference or sponsored, I would say safely 15 to 20 people to get jobs because I know what, people did that for me. And I always ask them, do it for other people, because that is the only way when you're dealing with systemic racism. It was like, it's really systemic. Like, you need to be coordinated. You need to have people lined up to support you, because if you think you can do it alone, just, call me in 5 years and tell me how that went. I'll sit back and watch. You're not. You're really not. You need people to look out for you and to be thinking about you. And the way you do that is invest in them.
Right. And I think, Sozi, a lot of people on the phone are like probably saying, or maybe saying, it's easy to say this, right? And it's easy to do, and we know it's hard, right? It's not the easiest thing to do, to get mentors, so we have just, some small tips for the person, or the one or two people, or the many people who might be struggling to even get to that mentor, to that ally, to have that first conversation. How do we break the ice? And then we'll go to talk a little bit about you and when you walk into the room, perception.
Yeah, I would say, before anything else, be very thoughtful about why you want a mentor, because I don't want anyone walking away from this conversation believing that you need a mentor so you can get a job. Because many young attorneys, and I felt into the same trap, they see the mentoring relationship as a transactional one. If I talk to this person, then they're going to get me a job and I'll be cool, and then I'll have to talk to them again. And so the first, because also a mentor would be like, what, I know you're cool. I know you must be an interesting person, but why should I commit my time to you? And so before anything else, you have to think, what can a mentor add to my career or to my life? And be very straightforward about that. And it takes some deftness, because if you've identified someone who's a great potential mentor, it's likely that a lot of other people have also, identified that person as a great mentor. And so one thing I would say is, like, you should go in and think through, am I looking for a job, or, is this somebody who is going to introduce me to someone? And so the emails I get where I find are very effective, they're very specific. They said, I've been introduced to you by so-and-so, and, I've heard about you through so-and-so, and I'm interested in your thoughts about this thing. Or come, if you have time, to come and speak to this person or that person. But it has to be in context. It can't be like you can't be somebody who's sort of like a stalker or a fan, because that's not, because anybody you can think about who would be a great mentor, like, I'm sure you get the same thing, like Satra, I know you do D&I. I love D&I. I would love to hear more. I would love for you to be my mentor. And you're like, I've got a lot going on, So those are a couple of tips.
Thank you. That is awesome. That is awesome. Now I want to pivot a little bit, and we continue talking about mentoring, but I want to pivot about resilience, right? You went to Harvard undergrad, Harvard Law. For those of you who don't know, Sozi is this tall, striking guy. He's sitting right now, but he stands up, and you're like, holy cow, who are you? He walks into a room. So Sozi, I just want to talk about, Harvard undergrad, Harvard Law, and talk a little bit about resilience. Just pivot into resilience for a moment, and talk about, even if we fall, there are times we fall, we need to find strength to get back up again. Can you just talk to us a little bit about that? Share some personal life examples, your career, where you've done this, and how mentors have been instrumental in that, And you can even talk about how you ran away from home and the police brought you back home, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Let me just turn this off here. There's like craziness.
So this helpful.
So,
go ahead.
So, any good son, your mama call, you got like, what's that number that you gave me? I'm like, Mom, that's you gave me the number. But that's my best mentor. She's like, I'm gonna charge you. Anyway, I think when I my journey was very interesting, and I mean we all have interesting journeys, in that I never expected to go to an Ivy League school. I grew up in North Philadelphia. I didn't learn English until very late. And so I was just happy. My parents were very happy to get me out of the house. And so when I got to Harvard, it was a real shock because I went to it's the biggest public school in Philadelphia. And it's a school that also didn't really train people to go to an Ivy League school. So when I got there, I was completely miserable. The first year, I was, my grades were struggling. I missed being home. And also, I just didn't have a lot of people who came from like the inner city like I did. But I think what helped me a lot, and also at the time, the Bell Curve had come out as a book that essentially argued that, the government should do less for Black people because they're just cognitively not up to speed, and we're hurting them with affirmative action. And you're in the middle of debates where they're debating your right to be there. There's the Belonging Project, your right to belong. Like, they're not that dumb. They're not. Sozi, what do you think? I'm like, you're talking about me, or are you talking about generally? But I think what made a big difference for me was being around people and mentors who believed in me and who also were intellectually just without peer. So I was an Afro-American studies major. And part of that was because as an African, I didn't have the larger history about America. I knew Rosa Parks, I knew Dr. King, but I was like, there's got to be a little bit more than that. I feel like over 400 years, it's got to be a little deeper. And then I was mentored by Professor Evelyn Brooks Higginbotham, who's the wife of the late Judge Leon Higginbotham. She's now the chair of the history department at Harvard, the first African-American woman. And, I took civil rights seminars with her. She introduced me to Judge Higginbotham. And I really understood, I'm like, wow, this guy's a scholar. He's a judge. He's a lawyer. He's an amazing person. And then that gave me the confidence being in that setting. Like, my grades started improving. And then I felt like there was a future. There was like, I can do more. And my grades picked up. And then in law school was the same way. It was Lonnie Grenier. And I actually made an effort I took all the Black professors except for Professor Ogletree, and Professor Edley, Professor Randall Kennedy. And it was a great experience because, you felt, I mean, they would say, there once was a president of Harvard Law Review, his brother called Barack Obama, because he graduated like 7 years before I started. I'm like, ain't no brother named Barack Obama. I'm gonna tell you that right now. Y'all be making up stories. I ain't doing law review. So, but one thing I'll tell you about Harvard is we didn't have a lot of Black people. It was about 10%, 12%, but because the law school was so big, about 550 students, it meant that every year you had 60, Black graduates. And the biggest disparity, and you see it across the legal establishment, is that there are just no Black men. We had about 12 or 13 out of a class of 554. So that, that's pretty striking. We were about 40 to 50 sisters. So, again, quite a big disparity. But I think I learned resilience because if I had just given up, my dad would never forgive me or anything. But I had mentors who pushed me through. And that's continued throughout my whole life, my whole career. And I'll end on this. Like when I was at the law department, I was running the law department when we had a suicide. And I called my mentor right away. As the first one, I said, I don't know how to deal with this. Like I can do the legal stuff and whatever, but remind me, like, take care of yourself so you can take care of your people. And I'll never forget that. I was the first person to walk into the, we brought somebody to help people heal. In order to give people the license to walk in, I was the first one to do it. And then that really, for a lot of people, like that forged my relationship with them, that allowed me to sort of move on. But my mentor, without that, I would have been like, I can't do this, right? But my mentor, who I love her to death, was just like, I know your instinct just to go in there and do whatever, just like slow down, make sure you're good, because then you can do all that, and we rarely do that.
Thank you, Sozi. And I have one last question to end because we're almost out of time. Very, very powerful. Rosa Parks once said, each person must live their life as a model for others. So to close, what's one thing you try to do to be a model, and share any final thoughts you have with the audience?
I try to treat everyone as though they matter. You know, I want everybody to know, and that's something I learned from the U.S. Attorney's Office as a prosecutor. I had so much power, and I didn't have to treat anybody, you know, particularly defendants. But because in the federal system, most defendants end up being cooperators, you get to know them very well. And that's something I always took with me, and you know, just to treat everybody like they matter. And I started doing that at the law department. I knew everybody's names. I knew who was getting married, and you know, they just were surprised. They're like, "You're my boss's 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 boss, and you know my name." I say, "Why wouldn't you? You work for me?" And it's something I keep, you know, I continue to do every day. I think at Penn Law, I always know the front person sitting in the front desk. I went over and took a picture with her last week because I missed her. But you know, she's somebody who always like, "You're doing a good job, young man." And you know, anybody who calls me a young man, I'm good. That makes me really happy. So that's a nugget that I learned from my parents, and I always, you know, persist with.
Thank you, Sozi. Thank you for all those nuggets, all the great advice, the tips. We call them nuggets, right? Golden nuggets. You've given us a lot to think about today. Thank you to Cypher and the Belonging Project for inviting us today. And many thanks to all of you, our audience participants, for joining today's conversation. We are going to continue to unleash the power of mentoring through inclusive leadership. So if you have any questions, additional questions, you can send Sozi and I a LinkedIn. Sozi talk about everyone's LinkedIn you, but just mention the Belonging Project with your question, and we will absolutely respond to you. Thank you again, and thank you, Cypher.
Thank you.
All right, everyone, have a great day.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.